The reason why I'm involved in this, I'm 86 years old. 86, I ought to be kicked back and eating bonbons and not worrying anymore. But instead, I'm out running, chairing the High Speed Rail Coalition at the national level and the Ethics Council at the local level and kinds of stuff. Uh, because I am frightful regarding the future for my grandchildren. Now, I can see a lot of silver tops in the audience, and God bless you all. Uh, and I know you have the same feelings. And when the COP committee, the UN committee on climate change, came back in 2018 and said we had 12 years before the climate change program progress would become too serious to turn back. Uh, I paid attention. They then updated that 2 years ago and said that it was occurring faster than they had expected. Remember, this study was done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, including 72 Nobel laureates and the best scientists in the world. Now, of course, our president ignores it and won't even go to the COP30 conference, which is occurring in South America. Our governor has to represent the United States there, and he's doing a great job, by the way. But that information is science. And what it says is that the uh, accumulation of carbon on Earth is occurring so rapidly, coming primarily from us driving uh, petroleum-powered cars and using petroleum to create electricity, not necessarily petroleum, but carbon-based fuel, coal, and so on. And it's accumulating in the atmosphere at a very rapid rate. And what it does, it creates a shield through which the sun's uh, energy cannot then exit from the earth. It when it comes at us from the sun, it goes through that blanket of guck up there. It hits the earth, and most of it in the past has bounced off back into the universe. But now it's bouncing off the inside of that layer of carbon fumes and bouncing back to Earth. So we have a boomerang effect with that all that energy, and it is causing us to cook the planet. Well, it's getting worse and worse as we drive more and more cars and create more and more electricity from coal and other things. Now we've started to turn it around. Europe and other countries have turned it around. Uh, uh, we're going in the wrong direction very fast right now. Unfortunately, China is going in the right direction, uh, but we're going in the wrong direction, and the other petroleum producing countries are going in the wrong direction. Now, the key to this is electrically powered mass transportation. We're looking around the world at the countries that have high speed rail, have electric feeder distribution systems, and are driving more and more electric cars. And they're in compliance now with the Kyoto Accords, which are the Bible on coming into compliance to fight this problem. And they're in compliance now. In fact, the Scandinavian countries are almost to zero carbon. We're going in the wrong direction rapidly. We had been making progress under the past two presidents, but now we're going in the wrong direction very, very rapidly. That's my bottom line. That's why I'm fighting this battle, because if we can inject electrically powered transportation into the American formula, then we will win this battle and we'll have a future for our kids. If we continue to do what we're doing now, the worth the earth as we know it will end. And it won't be a long time from now. It'll be in the next 50 to 100 years. Now, that's what COP30 is telling us, and we need to pay attention. So it's our job in America to build electrically powered transportation system. I have two electric cars. I have 48 solar panels on my roof. Let me tell you, honest politicians don't retire rich. So I've had to squeeze every dime to do those things. And they cost less once you bought them. They cost less to operate. So we're trying to do it right. And I know that if we're going to do it right as a society, it means electrically powered transportation. Now, you have the perfect opportunity in Santa Cruz County to start from the top down and build yourself an electrically powered transportation system. The route from Davenport all the way on down through the county to Pajaro, and then eventually on down to Monterey and out to Watsonville and pardon me, out to Gilroy, is sitting there and waiting for you to adapt it to this. It's going to cost some money to do good things. It costs money. Europe is spending that money and building the systems. So is China. China has 27,000 miles of 235-mile-an-hour trains now. 27,000 miles. We don't have one. Spain, a poor country, has 5,000 miles of electrically powered 200-mile-an-hour trains. And we don't have 1 mile. It's because we're dominated by the oil companies. So let's buck up and tell them where to go and tell them that our kids are more important than their next drop of oil. Now, let's talk about what you can do. Your network coming all the way down through the county with spurs off to Felton that you already have and into other areas is sitting there. It has rails in that corridor. Now, those rails could be used as they are, just cleaning up the right of way. They could be used as they are if you wanted to begin using light rail vehicles with batteries. Now, Europe is exporting those now. They're uh, they're like uh, they're like small trolley cars with a battery pack that is exchangeable periodically and can be charged. So you have another battery pack waiting for you when you need one, and there's stops along the way. Now that's being done now in Europe. It's being exported from Europe to other places. Now you probably wouldn't want to use the current rails. You could, but you wouldn't want to because they're rough. So replacing those rails is chicken feed compared to establishing a heavy rail system or even building a highway in that corridor. Highways are expensive, folks. You build a 4-lane freeway and you spend more money than you're ever going to spend on transportation in the Santa Cruz area. But they do it piece by piece by piece. Let me tell you a little truism. You can build a highway and people begin using it when you build from interchange to interchange to interchange, because they can get off the road in their car and get on the feeder roads to the next interchange. But you can't do that with the rail system. You have to build the whole network. Otherwise, people aren't going to use it. So you need to think about building the network. And if you do, you're going to have more people using your network than you have using highways because it's going to be more convenient and less expensive. Okay, so you have an opportunity then to have a network that goes from Davenport and down to Monterey and up over the hill to the old right of way to Gilroy, where it would meet the high-speed train. The high-speed train, by the way, is going to happen now. The state legislature just gave it $20 billion to finish the starter line in the Central Valley and to begin extending a line from Chowchilla to Gilroy. It's going to happen. And it connects in Gilroy to the Caltrain, which is being upgraded to an electrically powered all electric system and will accommodate high-speed rail. So it's happening. If you're ready, you'll be part of it. You'll feed right in at Gilroy and you'll be able to tap in to the regional system and go to Oakland or Santa Cruz or to San Francisco, or you can go on out through Gilroy to the Central Valley and on down to San Francisco and be there in less than 2 hours. 2 hours from Gilroy. That's not a bad way to look at the future. Now, let me end my comments by saying, and I've been a little herky-jerky, and I apologize. Let me end my comments by saying that you can do this or you can rail bank. Now, let me tell you what rail bank is. It's a law that was encouraged by people that wanted to get rid of railroads. We had the largest rail network in the world in the United States in the early 1900s. We now have a fraction of that left. And it's because when they talked about rail banking, you set aside the right of way to have rails put back in it in the future. It has never happened. It happened a little tiny bit in a place in Texas, but it didn't last. All of those other thousands and thousands of miles of rail lines that were supposed to have been rail banked for future use and became bicycle paths or walking paths or roadways have never been reestablished as rail lines. That's gospel. And so if someone is talking to you about rail banking, your precious line that is never going to be created again because of all the right-of-way obstructions. If someone's talking to you about doing that, they're either lying to you intentionally or very poorly informed. And that's the fact. Now, what you can put into that corridor, though, is light rail. You could put heavy rail, but you're going to have to spend some more money to strengthen some of the bridges and those kinds of things. But it's very easy to install a light rail system in that corridor. Your structures, I think, would be strong enough. You have to put new track in and put new uh, uh, ties and track and signals and those kinds of things. But you don't even need to put the overhead wires in with the new electrically powered trolleys that I mentioned before. Now you have an ideal opportunity because you happen to have a guy named Panetta representing you, at least part of it. He is dynamite. Not so much because of him, but because of Papa. His name is gold in Washington. And if you take advantage of that opportunity, you can get things done that other areas could never think about doing. But you have to be ready. To be ready, you need to do an environmental impact report. You need to do a feasibility study, which would include alternatives analysis. And then you need to choose alternatives that you want, not that you're told that you need to want. You don't need a heavy rail system in that corridor. You're not going to carry cement cars anymore. They're that the plant is shut down, and if the plant ever wants to open up, let them rebuild a heavy railroad system. All you need is a light rail system. It doesn't need to have bridges rebuilt and those kinds of things. And and you can do that with a reasonable budget. Now, a reasonable budget is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars, probably a billion. But that's what is due you. Other areas are receiving those grants. If you don't get a grant like that for your transportation system, then you're being shortchanged because you're paying money that you're not getting back. So talk to Jimmy Panetta. Get your package together and go like hell.
It's cute.
Thank you, Rod. And to our guests in the in-person audience, we've given folks index cards if they want to write a question down. On the Zoom, you can use the chat feature to send some questions in. We might not get to everyone's question, but we'll try. And they should be on topic, not argumentative with our speakers, but ask the man a question while we have him. And I'm going to start. I have a question for you, Rod. I'll bet you have some ideas around this. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Okay. We read and we hear from, I think, reliable sources that for every dollar of public money spent on transit investments, there's a $4 return on that investment. I'm imagining directly and indirectly. Can you speak to some of the benefits compared to obviously that single passenger dependent on driving cars? How does that 4-to-1 thing? What are some of the features that make that a reality? The return on investment.
Well, the return on investment will depend on your project, so you can't use that always universally. Yeah. But it's a good return on investment. Let me describe what happens. You build a transportation system, and it moves people around relatively, especially if it's an electrically powered system. You move around very inexpensively. Electric vehicles are very simple. They're much more easily maintained than the old diesel-powered systems. So the first of all, the system is less expensive, and the system is fun to ride. And then there are some hidden benefits that we don't think about. You need housing down there. You need housing in locations that don't cause friction with your population and don't cause urban sprawl. That's really hard to do. But you can do it with the transit system. With the transit system, you're going to have stations from place to place. Now, those stations are going to have big parking lots around them, more or less big parking lots around them. And those parking lots of the stations are typically buffered a bit from the population. There's no reason in the world why you can't put that parking underground, a couple of stories of parking underground, and then build 10 stories of apartment complex or condominium on top of that parking, not in the neighborhoods, not in a location that's going to inconvenience your friends, but on top of the parking at a train station, which is typically already in a cluttered area. Now, let me tell you what that does. It not only takes care of your housing requirements, but it also uh, turns that land, which is off the tax rolls, owned by the government, into property tax bearing land. Everything above the transit system becomes property tax as possessory interest tax. And it's very high rate property tax. It's under Prop 13, it's recent valuations, and it goes to the city, the county, school districts, special districts that are around the area now. Now that will give you a huge rate of return on that investment. In Europe, that money goes to the transit agency. The revenue, and in Japan, that money goes to the transit agency. Here it would go to the city, local governments, municipal and special district and school governments. So right there, that's a huge boon. So I can go through a half a dozen more, but we don't have the time.
That's a great start. And we live in a county that is woefully underfunded. We keep 13 cents of every dollar spent on property, I think. So those are all great points. And I have a question, and for the context for this, I know you've seen we talked after that, but you've seen the $4.3 billion HDR estimate that was done for our heavy rail concept plan, right, Rod?
I have.
And the question is this: that train estimate is 4.3 billion or 200 miles per rail mile, Highway one lanes.
Million per rail mile. We didn't know.
What did I say?
You said 200 miles.
Oh, sorry, 200 million per rail mile.
I
Highway
understand, Ray.
one, yeah, Highway one lanes are 10 million per lane mile. If we can't get the money, what's your response?
Well, first of all, you probably don't need heavy rail. And secondly, if you're going to build heavy rail, I don't know why, because you're not going to use heavy rail on it. That you're never going to want to have that. The only reason why you're doing heavy rail is if you're going to restart the cement factory, and you don't want that cement factory there. It burns coal. Coal is the worst polluter in the world, and you don't want more coal-fired combustion around. So,
For light rail, that's a light rail study.
No, it's not light rail, Gary, and I don't want to have an argument here, but it was for commuter, inner city commuter rail and not light rail. Thank you. Go ahead, Ron.
the commuter, if you say you're going to use it for commuter rail, then you're talking probably about the old diesel systems that were running on the Caltrain system that are running now to Gilroy. Well, that's archaic. So that's archaic technology, which is being sold off as quickly as they can to less fortunate areas. You're going to want electrically powered light rail. If you don't get that, you should hold out for it because it isn't available quite right now, but you're not ready right now. You won't be ready for if you start right now, you won't be ready for 5 or 10 years. 10 years more likely. And in that period of time, everything is going to be electrically powered, including the light rail system. And there's no reason why you should have to have a heavy rail construction to handle what would become a system based on battery powered light rail vehicles.
Thanks. I have one other question, Carl, but before we do that, just for everybody's clarification, and Rod, the concept report, the specification was for a zero emission passenger rail system. So like you're familiar with the San Bernardino system that we use a hydrogen fuel cell powered electric, but it's not a light rail vehicle. It's a inner city scale rail vehicle. That's what they were talking about
Barry,
getting.
let me ask you to pause there because
Yes.
hydrogen power is not zero pollution.
Oh,
When
I
you
understand that.
when you create hydrogen, you have to use energy to digest the water that goes
That's
into
right.
create the hydrogen, and they
Yeah.
don't measure that pollution, and that typically is electricity or petroleum powered devices.
I agree. Something like 90% of the hydrogen that's used today is derived from natural gas. So it's
Yep,
not, it's a zero tailpipe emission
yes.
technology. And I'm with you. We have battery technologies for light rail that can make that distance work.
In
And
addition,
we
Barry,
haven't, what's that?
in addition, you
Yeah,
don't have the advantage of having a simple drivetrain that's very
right.
easy to maintain. You have the old piston and carburetor and coolant mess that you're working with now in your petroleum powered cars. So you don't have the advantages of electric systems when you go to hydrogen. So try to get them to stick with electric.
And I have one other question here. And if anyone else has an index card, bring it up. I have, what do you recommend we do when our electeds are not representing the majority voters, but a wealthy minority? I don't know if that falls in your area of expertise. Any
Well,
other questions?
that's that's an organizational matter for a good Democratic club to take on. Uh, If you if your elected officials aren't representing you, replace them. And you do that with good organization.
Great. Uh, I have an online question. Do we have a card?
Yeah.
Let, let me ask the online question first. While we wait for high-speed rail, can there be direct rail from San Francisco, San Jose, San Jose to Los Angeles and San Diego? Um, and I think that question, Rod, is can we do some improvements other than, while we're waiting for high-speed rail, which is
Well,
taking such.
we've been pushing Amtrak for years to improve the Starlight, to try to get them to upgrade the quality of service. And they have two problems. First, they're an archaic organization that doesn't know how to run a train. And second, the and they're trying to use substandard equipment and substandard right of ways. And the second is that right of way along the coast is being affected by climate change already, and it's falling into the ocean. And when chunks fall into the ocean, they go years before they're replaced. And when they're replaced, they're all set to fall in the ocean again. So I think as much as we want to be able to use Amtrak, it's not going to be very reliable until we ultimately hope the ideal situation would be to build a high-speed rail network for the West Coast and turn it over to Amtrak to run if we can get Amtrak to operate like a good railroad.
All right, thank you. Denise, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, we must have struck a nerve because this is a great in-person turnout and we have an excellent online turnout of people that I've never met before. So I'm very excited about that. And we all come to conversations with different values, different opinions. And this is a place to be curious, to lean in, and to agree to disagree if that's what it takes. But I just really want to encourage respectful conversation on what has been a very charged issue in our county. So I'm going to read you a question. It's for Diridon, about money. The numbers are unfathomable to people like me. So I'm going to read this as a direct quote. I'm glad you brought up science, but what about the math? If you say we have 12 years, a rail system will take 25 to 30 years. How is this acting with urgency? Why not simply electrify our current system and work with promoting micro transit?
I think that's a grand idea, but you have to get the alternative evaluated. You have to prove that you can do it, and then do it. I think you could. You could not go very fast. You couldn't go 70, 80 miles an hour on it because the rail is in the right of way is a bit level. But you could go 50, 60 miles an hour if it's installed properly. And if you had battery packs on your pods, works just fine and relatively inexpensive. But let me stress this now. You have to get an alternative analysis, an environmental statement, and a record of decision that shows it can be done before you're going to get the state and federal grants. That'll have to be done through your transit agency. That would be in contradiction of what they have now, but that can be done too if you change the instructions to the consultants and say you're willing and enthusiastic about the possibility of the pod car systems.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a couple of questions on Zoom. One is, our local RTC chose to study heavy rail rather than light because more funding would be available from the federal government. Do you feel we can get funding for light rail?
Yeah, they'll give you the funding based on what you have your final environmental clearance approved at. In other words, if you do an alternative analysis You indicate that you're happy to have a light rail system with pod cars with batteries, and have that as one of the alternatives, and then do the evaluation to see if it can be done. Uh, that's that's approved. That is what the federal government will be granting you, granting your funds based on. Now, that's where Jimmy comes in. He knows the buttons to push, and if he doesn't, Daddy does. And as soon as we get rid of this president, pardon me for being political, but as soon as we get rid of this president, we'll have an opportunity to really build something, and it won't take 25 years. If you do it the way I've just mentioned it, with community support, it'll take more like 10 years, with a portion
Thank
of
you.
it before that.
Got a couple other questions. Are you familiar with, and do you have an opinion of the PRT system, glideways? It's talking about a route between Diridon Station and the airport, and another program they have up in Contra Costa County.
Yes, I have. I've ridden it, and it's a good system. It I don't think it has the speeds you want, uh, and I'm a little concerned that it would not protect your rail system because those operate on tires. But
Yeah,
it's a good kind of a system, and the thing I like most about it is that it's battery powered, and the battery
right.
packs are in the vehicles. Now, if you were to give them the specifications that you want that system to operate on rails, they could develop that for you.
Okay, thanks. Another question. The Santa Cruz branch line is in the corridor ID program. Uh, are you familiar with, and can you explain the benefits of the corridor ID program as a funding matter?
Well, it's golden. If you have an ID and are declared by the Federal Railroad Administration as a corridor to be protected, then you're halfway there. And don't lose that. If you start rail banking and forget about your your uh, your designation, you can't get it back. They're not going to give it back to you. But if you've got it, then the door is open for you.
It sounds like great advice. I have one more question, because we do have another speaker. Rod, can you do a quick comparison of the estimated costs all in to build, run, maintain the two-lane highway compared to the two-way train for taxpayers?
Well,
There's, yeah,
it really depends on a lot of things. Terrain, it depends on uh, uh, how much population there is around it, and all of those things. So you can't just compare them ad hoc. Uh, it's generally considered, and you don't have two-lane freeways anymore. You have four-lane freeways or six-lane freeways. You're going to have a six-lane freeway immediately in Santa Cruz County, or you're going to have gridlock like you already have on your four-lane freeway. So, don't be thinking that you're just going to build two more lanes. It's You're going to have to build at least a six-lane freeway in order to meet the currently seen demands, and that's just going to add pollution and tear up your countryside. So think of what it costs to to build and maintain a six-lane freeway as it would compared to taking care of a light rail system. And the light rail system comes out way ahead, both in terms of construction and operation.
thanks. I've got one more online commenter. It's a little bit lengthy, but I'm going to read it to you. It's kind of two-part. Sales tax is often described as being the only way of funding a 20% local match for grant funding. What other sources do you see as worth pursuing? That's A. And then B, former Sonoma County officials who were involved in implementing smart system have repeatedly cautioned about overly expensive system designs created by transportation consultants and not subsequently challenged and subject to peer review to identify lower cost alternatives. And I think that's our last two areas of inquiry: sources of funding, and then the business of over design.
Well, let me go the other way. The design issue, uh, you turn a consultant loose, they'll always come up with the most expensive design for you. It's just, it's because they're going to eventually be involved in the construction, very likely. And the more expensive it is, the more larger the chunk of their profits are. Now, I'm not down on consultants. The consultants are the wisest people around, but you got to manage them properly to get them to provide you good product. But they're always going to err in the direction of a heavier capacity, but more expensive system. Now, what was the other portion, Barry?
The question is, other than a sales tax measure,
Ah, gotcha.
to reach a 20% local match for grants that we might apply for, what are some of the other avenues for creating that match?
Well, sales tax has been the traditional one. Santa Clara County has 3/4 of a penny permanent for the transit system forever. And then on top of that, we've adopted between a half cent and a full cent on special projects. Right now we have, I think it's 10.5 cents on the total sales tax, and a full penny of that over and above the continuing sales tax is being invested in our BART and high-speed rail projects in Santa Clara County. LA County has a full penny going to forever, by the way, never, no limits, full penny forever for their transit agency to build out the transit system that was torn up back in the 1930s. And so sales tax is probably your best bet. And it's also very predictable, uh, easily managed. Uh, I Other sources would be things like value capture around the stations. I described the situation of building a high rise on top of your parking lots. Well, that's a way of garnering money for the transit agency because the transit agency would receive leasehold fees from the builder of the living units. Maybe leasing it for 30, 40, 50 years, at which time the transit agency would get the land back and do it all over again. That's the way it's done around the world. So that would be a source of revenue too. It would not be an immediate source, and it would it would be difficult to bond on that source, but that's another source. Um, I think those are the two primary ones, Barry.
Excellent. Rod, thank you. Thank you so much. I think
Thank you.
all of this very useful information, and we're both grateful. And I hope we haven't heard the last from you, because there's going to be, there's more work to be done. And we're grateful for your help, sir.
Happy to help you. By the way,
Please,
I
yeah.
don't know whether they all know, but you're a wonderful former supervisor, former assembly member, former treasurer, county treasurer, now mayor of Santa Cruz. Fred Keeley used to work for me back before Barry was born. Uh,
Red's pretty old then.
Well, you're both invaluable assets to our community, Mayor Keeley and yourself. We're grateful for all the work that both of you do. Feel free to stay in the session, and or as if you need to go, feel free to go. we are recording the presentation.
Barry, my wife just pulled my ear, says she wants to go to dinner. So I'm going to stay with you as long as I can until I get my ear pulled again.
Go to dinner, go to dinner.
All right, my regards to Gloria and enjoy your dinner. We'll talk again soon. Thanks, Rod.
Is it possible to speak to the question that Mr. Diridon was speaking to?
Thomas, if I'm Mr. Diridon, you're not
Yes.
Thomas. Say Rod.
Rod, yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm a civil engineer and I'm a third generation civil engineer, and everything you say makes
Good for
sense.
you.
Everything you say makes sense. I'm here in Sonoma County, and I just wanted to point out that there is a $300 million contract which was just issued by the state for extension of our smart train, which I've been supporting for many years. And our we got a sales tax. It's only a quarter cent, and we're going for an initiative to extend that now. But we received $300 million, which was awarded in a contract to extend from Windsor to Healdsburg. And that includes a fairly major bridge across the Russian River at Healdsburg. And that's about 6 or 7 miles, 300 million. So it's less than 50 million per mile on that. Right now, it's a current contract. So, 200 million is a very high number per mile, and I don't think that's
Boy.
supported.
It is phenomenal. That the 200 million a mile is what we're paying to build high-speed rail in the Central Valley. Good.
Right.
Congratulations to you, Thomas.
No, thank you, and a great conversation you're having.
Mhm.
Barry,
Okay.
could I say
Thanks again,
something?
Rod. We're going to bring Megan on deck.
All right,
Great,
can I?
good questions all. And Megan, I see you there. I'm going to pin you to our, see that over here. And thank you, Rod. And Megan, there you are. Megan, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, it's so exciting to have you. I'm going to let you do a self-introduction. Some of the people in the room and in the meeting remember you being here. Was it in May of 22?
22. I was looking it up today. Yes, it's been a few years.
And remind us, how did you come to meet people, and what were the things that led to your providing those 2 Zoom meetings that you did back then?
Sure. And thank you, Barry, for having me. Thank you, Rod. That was super interesting. This is obviously something I'm steeped and immersed into. And I do want to start right off the bat by saying I do not have an agenda for rail banking here. That is something that your local community and stakeholders are going to have to decide. To Barry's question, to the introduction, what I do and what I've done for almost 20 years now, almost my entire career as a lawyer. I am a lawyer, and you can hold your booze, but I am a lawyer, and specifically what I got myself into and what I do full time is I represent landowners who own property along corridors that are rail banked, federally rail banked. And so I research these all over the country. Sometimes people reach out to me and give me the heads up. I read about in your local press that this was a corridor that was proposed for rail banking back in 2022. And so I did some research and started digging into it. And I'm going to go over this a little bit, why I identified this would be a case where I think there would be landowners that would need help from a lawyer, such as myself, who does this. So by way of introduction, I work at a law firm in St. Louis called Lewis Rice, and you could be like, what does a lawyer from St. Louis have to do in Santa Cruz, California? But these cases, they're Fifth Amendment takings cases against the federal government, if this were to be rail banked. And they are heard in a little known court in Washington, D.C. that is directly across from the White House called the Court of Federal Claims. And the Court of Federal Claims has nationwide jurisdiction. And so any corridor in the entire United States that's been rail banked, if there is a landowner with a takings claim, that is the proper forum to file your claim. I've practiced in that court since 2008. I am now part of the advisory committee to the court on takings and tribal claims. I don't do tribal claims, but takings is under that umbrella. And I'm also on the court's board of governors. And so I say that because what I hope to do tonight and hope to do in an abbreviated fashion for any of you who are there in 2022 is to just put accurate information out into the community about what rail banking is legally, from a legal perspective, whose rights are affected, and what remedies they have. Again, no, whether this happens or not, I understand the initiative that passed or that was proposed to voters overwhelmingly showed that the voters at the time were not advocates of rail banking. And I, quite frankly, after that, have just been sort of watching the press and thought, well, this isn't going to be a takings case. But then I did see that there is some discussion about possibly going that way again for sections 8 through 11. And so what I want to do tonight is just, Barry sent me some questions. I think my comments should.
Oops, wait.
Uh-oh.
Lost-
Of
wait.
information.
Oh, wait, you just came back.
Try again.
Oh no. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry.
You're
I am
good.
doing this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm just going to get to it. I don't know how much was cut out. I am doing this from home. It is 9:30 my time. So
we appreciate you, and we're not a hostile audience by any means. And just as a preface to your being here, it was like, who do we know that knows the law and knows our county situation? Because there's a lot of conversation, and I'm sure a lot of misunderstanding. And so all of us are grateful here, I think, no matter where we stand on it. Go ahead.
wonderful. And so let's just start with just a little bit of education. What would have to happen for this corridor to be rail banked? First and foremost is the railroad, the owner of the railroad corridor, would need to make an application to the Surface Transportation Board. That is a federal agency that regulates the nation's railroads. No railroad can be abandoned in the United States without federal permission, no matter how long it's been disused, no matter how washed out the tracks and ties are. That is an active railroad until the federal STB says it's not. And so the railroad would have to apply to abandon. It's an abandonment application. The requirements for abandonment, what we call an exempt abandonment, which is essentially a railroad like this that doesn't have active service on the line, is that there have been 2 years without active service and that it won't affect any shippers. So, I think clearly this line would qualify and meet those very minimal requirements for abandonment. At that point in time, the STB will send out a notice, and any interested party can propose to the STB to negotiate with the railroad to rail bank the line. This is quite literally, it can be a 2-sentence letter to the STB. We would like to negotiate with the railroad. Please issue this order. We're willing to assume the financial responsibility for the line. If and only if the railroad agrees to negotiate with that party, the railroad controls this process 100%. If they agree to negotiate with whoever's applied to be the trail sponsor, then the STB will issue an order called a Notice of Interim Trail Use or Abandonment. What that federal order does is it authorizes the railroad to abandon the line and pull up those tracks and ties. The railroad legally cannot remove those ties while it is an active railroad. The need to, and that's what we call it for short, a Notice of Interim Trail Use or Abandonment, also implements a federal law called the Trails Act. So what is the Trails Act? The Trails Act was it was originally passed in the 1960s. And during that point in time, this was the Cold War, the nation's infrastructure was shrinking. Railroads, the interstate highway system it was nearly completed, and railroads were abandoning their track at a very rapid rate. And Congress was concerned about this national infrastructure. If you picture the nation's railroad infrastructure like a web, pieces of that web were falling away. And to Rod's point earlier, there were many, I think, I was not around at the time, but there were many rail and trail advocates that got involved. And someone had this light bulb idea. I got it. Let's just allow the railroads to abandon, but give these rights of way to these trail groups to run linear public parks, these trails. And Congress thought, problem solved, great idea, and they passed the Trails Act. And nothing happened. Railroads were still abandoning at a rapid rate. And the problem is that Congress did not, either it didn't consider this, it didn't know this, or a combination of both, willful ignorance or actual ignorance, but that most railroads don't own 100% of their corridor. And what I mean by that is they don't own the fee estate. So there may be some lawyers in the crowd, some of you that, maybe had the unfortunate experience of a property law class. But a fee estate in land is the absolute ownership in the land. What some railroads have are easements, the right to use that land in perpetuity forever, but only so long as it's a railroad. If that is the case, then an easement for a railroad cannot be used for a trail under most states' laws. An easement is a specific right to use the land of someone else for a specific purpose. And so just to give you a little bit of background, California law is extraordinarily clear on this. All property law is state law created. And so there was a question before the meeting about state law. And I'd like to say, this is all federal. Railroads are regulated federally. If this rail banking happens, it is a federal process and you will end up in federal court. That is why someone from St. Louis could represent you. It is not filed in California district court. It is not filed in your county court. And the reason is that federal law preempts state law. And so California state law matters. All of your rights in your property, to the extent you own property today, all of your rights in that property come from the state of California. The federal government does not create property rights, and every state has different property law. But in California, a railroad, this has been litigated many times, it has been found that if a railroad owns an easement for a railroad, that does not include the use as a public park. And actually the leading case on this issue comes out of California, and I quote it all of the time because it's really eloquent. It says, I don't care, the judge said, I don't care if you think it's better to have someone walking, hiking, playing frisbee on your land. The fact of the matter is that is a different use, and that was not contemplated in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when these railroads were created throughout our state. So what would happen here is the railroad, first of all, would have to go through this process. That has not started. The railroad is not filed for abandonment. So step one has not even occurred. If the community, the railroad, and the trail group decided to go that way, they would have to go through this federal process. The railroad could not abandon its line outright because I've done the research on this line, and part of this is an easement. Not all of it, but parts of it are, very clearly. I have gone and I have pulled every deed to the Santa Cruz Railway that was originally granted the railway. It was created through a combination of deeds and condemnation. And California's law on condemnation at the time only allowed the railroad to obtain an easement. And many of these deeds say things like, we grant you a right-of-way for railroad purposes across my land. California state law is very clear. That is an easement. That is a right in the land to use it for a railroad. Now, it might blow your mind. Why is some of it easement and some of it not? I don't have an answer for you on that. I have to just go down to how each individual piece of this corridor was created. I've worked with a mapping expert, and we match those. And I don't know, I have slides, Barry. I don't know if the screen is large enough to share my screen.
I will make sure I make that setting possible for you.
Okay.
Let me just make sure that you, in our case, and I hope you do understand, the Regional Transportation Commission, the county bought the corridor, but is not control. So the owner of the property is not a railroad, but there is a railroad that holds the freight easement, right? Does he understand?
And that's pretty common.
Okay.
That's not uncommon. So I say the railroad, I mean the owner of the easement, and that's not uncommon at all. I worked on cases like the Atlanta Beltline, where Norfolk Southern had reserved its freight easement over the line, but a consortium of quasi city government like organization owned the line. I have cases all over South Dakota where the county owns the line and they were giving the right to run it to a short line. So that is very common.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I
Good.
say railroad, I don't necessarily mean an organization that owns a single freight car. It could be the owner of the line. And the federal government does allow non-railroads to hold the line, but then a actual operating railroad may lease the rights to run their trains over that line. Or they may not. I have a case in Missouri where there wasn't a train car that ran over it for 40 years before it was abandoned. So there are all kinds of different fact patterns here, but I know for a fact that this is not an abandoned line. This is an active rail. This is an active rail line, according to the federal government. And in order to put it to trail use, exclusive trail use, not rail with trail, but trail, no tracks and ties, it would have to go through this rail banking process in the federal government.
Okay, good. I'll create this slide share permission for you in a second.
Okay, and I don't want to belabor it. They're not that exciting, the slides, but I just had, kind of the maps that we use and just, a little bit, people are interested sometimes on how do we get this information. I got maps from the National Archives. The National Archives has what are called valuation maps. In the early 1900s, the federal government mapped every square inch of right-of-way in the entire country, including how the railroad, to the best of their knowledge, acquired it. And on those maps are the book and page numbers of all the deeds and condemnation orders. And I quite simply reached out to the county and asked, I've got 85 deeds from the early 1900s I'd like. And, the county clerks don't love those requests because those books aren't usually kept in their desk. And we just pull the deeds and we read the documents. I mean, it comes down to what did the owner of your land, if you have land adjacent to the railroad, how did they grant the railroad the right to run their trains when it started? And that's going to usually define what right the railroad has today. Because once the railroad has their easement, that's all they need. Railroad easements are unlike your typical driveway easement or sidewalk easement. Railroads have the right to exclusive use, meaning the nature of their operations are such that if they need to put up a fence and keep you off the land, they can. They have, it's treated like fee ownership. And I think that's where it gets confused because over the last century, everyone just assumes the railroad owns it. And I run into that all the time. Like, we just assume my deed says that that's the edge of my land. But in California, like other states, if you have an easement bordering your property and that easement is abandoned, then you take to the center. And so that's a really important point. So what would happen if this railroad was abandoned? Well, under California law, those easements would extinguish and the underlying landowner would get full use and enjoyment of that land back. And if you wanted to reestablish that right of way, you would have to go acquire those rights from each and every owner where you didn't own it. That is why rail banking, I think, is an attractive option for communities because instead of dealing with hundreds of owners, you deal with one. Because what happens, and I'm usually better with my slideshow. It keeps me and keeps going in a linear pattern. But when the law was passed in 1983, I should get back to the Trails Act. Nothing happened because Congress forgot that the railroad didn't own it. So they simply fixed that problem. In 1983, they just inserted a really little simple sentence that said that rail banking or interim trail use is what the actual statute says. Interim trail use shall not be treated as abandonment for any rule of law. With that sentence, what Congress did is wiped out all 50 states' laws on this issue and said, We, the federal government, say, I don't care what California says happens when this is abandoned. We say it's not abandoned, even though it's being used for a trail. And right after that was passed and signed into law by Ronald Reagan in 1983, I like to point that out. A lot of property rights attorneys can't square that circle. But Ronald Reagan passed the Trails, or signed the Trails Act into law in 1983. And immediately thereafter, a rail trail in Vermont occurred, a conversion. And that couple were savvy about their property rights, and they sued and said this is unconstitutional. When this railroad goes away, we get our land back. And they went all the way up to the Vermont Supreme Court and they lost, and they ended up in the US Supreme Court. And in 1990, the US Supreme Court decided whether the Trails Act was constitutional and decided 9-0. I mean, rare now, but still rare back then in 1990, a 9-0 decision, including Justice Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, that said the Trails Act is constitutional because the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution provides a remedy. So they told the family, the Perceaus, it was called Perceau versus the Interstate Commerce Commission. The Interstate Commerce Commission is just the agency before it was renamed the STV. They said, Perceaus, you're absolutely right. Under Vermont law, you should have gotten all that land back. But the federal government has taken it for your private property for a public purpose. It doesn't get more public than a public park. And therefore, the Fifth Amendment says you're owed just compensation. So if you go back to civics class, the Fifth Amendment has a lot of stuff in it, but one of the clauses is, nor shall private property be taken for a public use without just compensation. It does not prohibit the government from taking private property for public use. It says if that happens, they must provide just compensation. That's what I do. I represent landowners. I file claims for just compensation. The court that Congress has given jurisdiction to do that is the Court of Federal Claims. You can sue the United States government, your own government, for compensation in that court in excess of $10,000. You could sue them in Northern California, but you would be capped at $10,000. So we don't file in local district court because, that we would cap damages. And so that's my piece of the puzzle, really, is when this happens after the fact, I come in and I will represent those landowners who want my services. And the claim is that under California law, if the railroad would have abandoned this, they would have had their land back. And the trail group would have had to pay them for that land that they're using for the trail. But under federal law, that was taken from them, and the federal government owes them compensation. So from a funding standpoint, I know that's a huge concern. A lot of my clients, are fans of the trail. Many aren't. I mean, I have clients that are on the trail group, their local trail group, and do everything they can, to oppose it, and everywhere in between. But the fact of the matter is that the money that is paid to the landowners does not come out of the funding for the trail. Every year, most years, Congress appropriates money when they feel like getting in session and appropriating funds. They will appropriate funds for the judgment fund. And that is a pot of money at the Treasury Department to pay the debts and liabilities of the United States. So essentially court orders against the United States. So if I represent property owners and they're paid, $2 million, it is not minus $2 million for the trail. It's not one pot of money and the landowners get a chunk and the trail gets a chunk. It's a completely separate funding source. So by making a claim and these claims being paid, it's not coming out of the budget of the trail. It comes out of the Treasury, and some can argue, that is all the same. But as far as specific grants and funding that the trail would get through the Department of Transportation and other funding sources, it would never come out of the judgment fund. That is only for judgments against the United States. I'm going to look at my questions here. Barry was kind enough to give me sort of anticipate some questions. To be successful in your claim, does the railroad have to own an easement? Yes. If the railroad actually owns the fee in the land, then they can do whatever they want with the land, just like any other property owner within the confines of local law. How do you know if the railroad had an easement? You have to do the kind of research that I did. And I have done that. And, if you want to reach out to me privately, and you do own land or you have a neighbor, I'm happy to, let you have that information. And I will tell you, some of the deeds are are not clear. I might read California law to say they're an easement. The Justice Department might read them to say it's a fee, and we might have to go to the court to determine that. I represent dozens of owners on the Great Redwood Trail that's going in between Willits and Arcata. And we are settling that case right now. Well, not right now, because right now everything's shut down, but ostensibly, hopefully soon, we'll once again be settling that case. But there is another law firm where they have some deeds that they've asked Judge Romel of this court whether they're fee or easement. The DOJ says that they're fee. The plaintiff's attorneys say they're easement, and the court will issue a decision. So it's not as simple as having the deed to the railroad. It's knowing what California law says about those deeds and the language that's used. None of them, very few of them, I should say, actually use the word easement. They'll say right of way for railroad purposes, most likely. What are typical obstacles to abandonment was another question before the meeting. The STB, their main goal is to keep our railroad infrastructure functioning. And so if a railroad applies to abandon, another railroad can come in and do an offer of financial assistance. And essentially what they're saying is like, we have the funding and we will take this over and keep it in rail service. To do that, though, they do have to meet some minimum requirements of funding and show an actual capability to do that. If you have a customer that comes into the STB and says, we were just getting ready to fire up operations again and start hauling gravel, timber, sand, products, whatever it may be, that could be a barrier to abandonment. What cannot be a barrier to abandonment is whether you want a trail or not. I've seen it dozens of times. The STB has taken the position that when Congress passed the Trails Act, its goal was to keep these rail corridors in national control at all costs. And so the STB does not care if there's funding for a trail. They don't care if the community wants it. They don't care if there was an initiative that failed by 75%. They will keep this under their jurisdiction if they can, rather than see it go or be abandoned. Now, that being said, in the hierarchy of things they want it to be in rail service. But if there's no realistic possibility of that, rail banking to the STB is the next best thing. What rail banking does, and the whole point of the law, again, is not to create parks. It was for some people that helped get it passed, but the intention of the law at the time was that it would keep these corridors in federal control for future reactivation. But Rod is absolutely right. Not too many of those have happened. There's been a few bits and pieces here that have been reactivated. But the fact of the matter is a trail is also a large investment. And if there was a real possibility of rail service in the near future, it would be hard to justify that sort of infrastructure investment. But legally speaking, that is exactly what rail banking does. It keeps it available for the future. And so, maybe this will be the most brilliant program when none of us are here and they bought all this land at 2025 prices for, something that happens in 2100. We may never know. I don't know. It's certainly not played out that way yet. There's not been a massive re-upping of the rail service on these lines. And the time, I got a question about the timing. If they were to decide to rail bank, it can go very quickly. It can go as quickly as I'd say more typically it's about 120, 180. That would be a fast process. And you in California will be shocked by this because I quite frankly am. There is not extensive environmental review. These things are turned in, they go from a railroad to a public trail, and there's no NEPA, there's no Clean Water Act, there's no environmental review. I shouldn't say that there is an environmental review, but it's not the kind of thing you would be used to at the state level at all. I've seen things where they can't remove the railroad because a certain kind of bat, like in Missouri, nests there, so in certain months, some limitations on things like that. But as far as bureaucracy goes, these things kind of fly through, to be honest with you. They can go very quickly. And finally, I got a question about state quiet title. And if this were to be abandoned completely, you would have to go to state court and quiet title if if anyone disputed your ownership. And but that's not, frankly, I think that's way outside of relevance here because I think, from what I've read and what I understand, the question here is rail with trail or rail to trail. I think those are the two possibilities that I've not seen anything, at least locally. I by no means live in your community, but I've not read anything saying there's a realistic effort to abandon this line. So I think, that's something that frankly probably don't need to worry about. All right. I think with that, I haven't really gone into what a takings lawsuit looks like because I think that's really for the individual landowners. But what their claim would be, and just because I feel very passionate that they sometimes get bad press as being against the trail, a takings claim against the federal government would not be against the trail. It would simply be saying, pay me the fair market value of what you took from me. So my best day in court for my clients is to get them the fair market value. There's no punitive damages. There's no treble damages. There's no extra bonus money that they can be given. It is truly, and most of them settle. And when you settle, you typically compromise. So the best hopes they have is getting the fair market value of what was taken. So with that, I will take any questions. I hope I haven't been cutting it out.
You've done a great job, and I think you hit most of the things I asked you about. I emailed you 3 questions that were handed to me, but I wanted you, I think I mentioned, we talked about House Bill 4924. And there's one other question that there's no agreement on in our community, and it's this. Because I think I've read in the Sonoma Marin situation, for example, that there were property claims made against by property owners who were merely adjacent to the rail corridor, that because there was a change of use in that property adjacent to them, they had a case. Is that a myth? Is that sometimes a successful case? What's the story behind that? Because indeed, most of the properties that are along the corridor are not involved in an easement situation.
So if you are merely adjacent to the corridor, you would not have a claim, but I want to be very clear here. If you are adjacent to the corridor, meaning the corridor touches your property, you are likely affected by an easement. 99% of the deeds I see use that border, they'll say the south right-of-way line or the north right-of-way line of the railroad. That does not necessarily mean you could not own the land underneath the railroad, because if the railroad's ownership is an easement, there's something called the strips and gores doctrine. And what that is that when most states, including California, have the public policy that we don't want these, when easements are abandoned, we don't want ownerless strips of land everywhere. It's an efficiency. And so what it says is we're going to presume the owners on either side own to the center line, absent proof to the contrary. So I've had situations, very rare, where some owner on one side actually owns all the way to the top of the railroad. That's probably because the owner way back when, their predecessor, owned all that, and they just kept, they kept that whole corridor on their property. So they've overcome the presumption. But a lot of times I see people saying, well, I don't own this. My property line is the edge. Your property line would carry to the center if it is an easement and it were abandoned. And that's the kind of title work that we get into. Sometimes we have to pull a full chain of title all the way back to the grantor at the time of the railroad to prove that. So I want to be careful with adjacent. If you're adjacent, meaning you're close but not on the trail, then no, you would not have a claim. But if you are touching the corridor, then you would have a claim if the railroad only owned an easement.
Okay, great. To ask for some clarification here, I think you said that if when a railroad is amenable, and that rail banking can happen very quickly. But when in our case where we don't have that condition, and we also have a great many unclear titles, easements, property conditions, we're all terrainy and crazy. what, if you have an impression based on past experience, compared to building trail without the rail banking and simply staying in the corridor and keeping the tracks, what are the possible impacts on the timeline for groundbreaking a project that has those constraints if our county decided to go after, I mean, not, we don't even know what they could do, but if they did something like an adverse abandonment, were successful, what is the time frame then when you have a lot of questionable features?
Yeah, so that's actually a couple issues kind of all rolled into one. So let me start with the questionable features. First of all, no one cares if the railroad owns this for rail banking purposes. That's the beauty of rail banking to the railroads. They get to sell this whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel for a trail, regardless of what their ownership interest is. That's what the Trails Act does. It says, we don't care. It just throws away that consideration, says, don't care what you really own. We say you own this all essentially in fee enough to sell it for a trail. So none of those would be barriers. Terrain, feasibility of building it. The STB, quite frankly, does not concern itself with that. They've said they're not a parks department, they're a railroad agency, and that's for you, the local community, to figure out. I've had many cases where the local community has raised enough money to buy the railroad for rail banking through rail banking from the trail, but they have no money to build the trail, and it'll be a decade. Here in Missouri, we had one, it was 25 years until they finished building it after they obtained those rights. So quite frankly, that will not be a barrier. None of those things will, the railroad could apply tomorrow to abandon, and, before summer, this thing could be rail banked. I mean, realistically, procedurally, the railroad though has to be the driver. The owner, and by that I mean the owner of the railroad line. So RTC, they have to be the ones to initiate it. They have to be the go along. They can say no at any point, and the whole thing stops. To your point about adverse abandonment, that is a feature in the STB, which would allow, for example, a county or quite frankly anyone, but the filing fee is like $22,000. So someone with something big to gain from it can file something called an adverse abandonment against a railroad. In that case, it is a very high level of evidence. I mean, STB does not want to forcibly abandon a railroad, but it can be done and it has been done. And the things they would have to show is that there's no rail service, there's no reasonable likelihood of rail service, the railroad's neglecting it, they're not investing in it, they're not spending money on it. And certainly those things have happened before, and adverse abandonment has been successful. If that happens, though, they can't rail bank it. Then it just is abandoned because, again, the railroad has to agree to rail bank. So it's always, the railroad always controls the outcome. The owner of the rail line, I should say, always controls whether it's rail banked or not. The House bill, yes, I did forget. I had a note about HR 4924, which is sponsored by a congressman in my state, Sam Graves, who I've talked to about rail banking. We have a lot of rails to trails in Missouri. And quite frankly, there's one across the state. There's one close to my home. They're pretty lovely. I've been on them both. And they both had takings claims, and owners got paid, and those trails are thriving. But my state, I did look it up before this. No surprise, nothing's happened during the shutdown. August 8th, it was referred to committee. It's called the Landowner Rights Act. Essentially what it proposes, there's two North Carolina congressmen, three Missouri, and one Wyoming. So they've got 8 sponsors. One of the requirements, it would do away with the Trails Act, to be quite honest. One of the requirements is that before a railroad could rail bank a line, they would have to get unanimous consent of the owners. And I mean, right there, unanimous consent of anything in this country today is just an almost impossible bar, in my opinion, from doing this. I have talked to thousands of landowners. I've gone to town hall meetings like the one you're having right now. And the diversity of opinion about this it's not just black and white. There are dozens of viewpoints, and I can't imagine a world where you would have a rail line where every single landowner would agree. So it would kill the whole process. it had some momentum before the shutdown. And I think, like everyone else, I'm going to wait and see sort of where Congress's priorities are when they get back to work. And I think there'll be some strong lobbying efforts against it. But I will say, I'm in the property rights sphere. I swim in those waters. And, there are a lot of people that don't like eminent domain and begrudgingly, admit it's in the Constitution, and they would quite frankly like it not to be. So you're gonna, there is always been opposition to the Trails Act because of its eminent domain component. And I don't see that changing with the political tides anywhere toward maybe those folks getting a little louder voice.
Great. I emailed you 3 questions that came in on index cards. If you want to look at those.
Yeah, I've got those right here. Okay, so one says, okay, 99 of 113 segments are fee simple deeds on the corridor. Only 14 are 19th century easements, and 4 deeds have reversionary clauses. Well, I would love to talk to this person offline. It sounds like someone's done some deep dive research. Um, I'm I don't know that I agree. I haven't counted, but I did go back and look. I just narrowed down to the segments we're talking about, and there was quite a few condemnation orders and deeds that use railroad purposes language. Reversionary clauses are pretty. Reversionary clauses mean sometimes the owner was explicit enough to say when this thing stops being a railroad, it reverts to me or my successors. That's pretty clear language. What happens? I'd love to talk to this person, and I'll give you my email. If you Google me and Rails to Trails, I have a pretty good social media presence, and I love to talk about this stuff. And so I'm happy to talk to someone about their research, and I'm always happy to hear that. Says, being that a number of the properties are majority RTC owned, why did our firm pursue this? Well, so quite frankly, I don't know that I agree that they're RTC owned. Railroads always quit claim their interest to the next railroad and so on and so forth. So from the original Santa Cruz Railway until it came to be RTC owned, in all likelihood, it just kept flipping by quitclaim deed. And what a quitclaim says is, I'm giving you what I have, but I'm making no representations about what I have. Railroads always did this because it didn't matter. They had plenty of property rights for what they needed. I mean, railroads were king, right? They have, they can exclude you. They can pretty much do whatever they want as long as it's for a railroad or even tangentially related to a railroad. So I don't know that I agree with the premise of the question that it's owned in fee simple by the RTC. And why my firm pursued this, I'll be very honest with you. That's what I do. That's how I make a living. I represent landowners who have claims against the federal government. We structure them on contingency, but there's also a fee shifting statute. Congress said if the federal government takes your land and you have to sue them, then you will be reimbursed your fees. And I think that's really important because I've had clients that have had $52 million judgments and they can afford to pay me my hourly rate. I've had many more clients that couldn't ever afford to hire a lawyer to fight the Justice Department. Yet the government took their land all the same, even if it's $3,000 worth of land. They're entitled to that compensation. And the barrier to entry is you have to sue the federal government represented by the DOJ to get that money. And so I think, they absolutely should have access to the courts and to that. So that's why I'm pursuing it. And I'll only pursue it if it happens. And like I said, I have no agenda here. I'm here if it does happen. I will be here for the landowners if they want my services. I think I just explained reversionary clause. Railroad purposes only. That's really important language. In California, that is pretty determinative of an easement. It does sort of depend where that clause is used in the deed, but that language would be very indicative of an easement. It says most deeds state, I grant you this land for the construction, operation, and maintenance of a railroad. Are these easements or fee title conditions? If the deed says, I grant this for the construction, operation, maintenance of a railroad, I think I have a pretty good argument that's an easement. Now, if it says, I grant this land, and then later in the deed it says for construction and operation and maintenance of a railroad, that may be a tougher argument. Words matter, where the words are in the deed matters, and what the words are. I mean, this is very it can be very technical and incredibly uh, sometimes it comes down to the judge hearing the case. I mean, some of these are, 51-49 and the judge makes a judgment call on it. I mean, we can't, best case scenario, we'd have these people on the stand and swear them in and say, what did you mean by this language? But they're all long gone. So all we can do is interpret the words they put on that paper 125 years ago.
All right. Megan, I know it's late where you are, later than it is here. And I'm thinking I might want to, I think you've answered a lot of the questions that I had got on cards, and some of the other ones are mighty specific. One that came in though, I think might be an easy one to answer, I hope. It's not specific, it's not, super detailed. But what was the easiest case and an example of an easy case and an example of a hard case that you worked on?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, so I should say, my cases consist of two big kind of stages. The first stage is proving that the government took something from you, which is exactly the conversation we're having. Did the railroad own it or not? And then the question becomes, how much was that property worth? How much is it damaged? The easiest case, one of the easiest cases I've had is in Florida, where we had a deed where it said, whenever you stop using this for a railroad, it should revert to me, my successors, and assigns. Believe it or not, the Justice Department fought us on that. We briefed it, and the court issued a published order, unsurprisingly saying that was an easement. The hardest case, I think the most disappointing case that I've ever had was the New York City High Line. That is a rail-banked easement, believe it or not. If you're familiar with Manhattan, it's an elevated railroad that goes through Manhattan. It's west side, along the West Side Highway. It was rail-banked in 2006. We represented landowners, and the only reason they lost, that railroad easement said for railroad purposes and such other purposes from time to time as the railroad shall see fit. But they lost because New York City, in dealing with them, buried a covenant not to sue the United States of America. And that entire case hinged on whether the United States could enforce that covenant that New York City made them sign. And unfortunately, the decision was they could. And so, disappointingly, Saturday Night Live used to have the High Line in its credits, and every time it just kind of made me cringe a little, took me out of the moment because I knew that those owners were not treated fairly, and were probably entitled to quite a bit of compensation for that land under the High Line. But yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my cases I think these are super fun. I get immersed in railroad law and history and meet a lot of people. We've had some really great results. And if you want to contact me, to Barry's points, highly specific questions that are probably things that only you and I are interested in, email me. Give me a phone call. If you Google my name, and Rails to Trails, you'll be able to get my information. But if you want, it's I can just give you my phone number now. It's 314.
Oh my gosh, you're brave.
7707. And my email address is my name, M Largent, no dots, no spaces, just M Largent @lewisrice.com. And it's LEWISRICE.com. That's my law firm. And like I said, I eat, breathe, and live this stuff. So I'm always happy to answer questions. And I think, to me, my background was in journalism at Missouri. I think getting accurate information, factually accurate information out in the community is the most important thing I can do outside of my legal work. So, people know, what actually happens when these happen and what's going on.
Thank you, Megan. I think you're going to probably hear from a few people. And I think it's the highest. It speaks so highly of you that you would share your contact information like that. We have no shortage of folks in the community that are suspect of motives and whatnot. And it's just like, dude, let's bring her on. She knows more than any of us do. And I thank you for sharing your contact information. If it's okay, I will send you, because I promised to try to get questions answered. I have index cards of questions. I sent you 3 of them. and you address those, and I have additional ones, but I don't want to drag the evening out. If I email you them, can you respond to me in an email when you have time?
Absolutely. And I
Yes.
appreciate you hosting this, and I appreciate the viewpoints. I found Rod incredibly interesting in his viewpoints on energy and rail, and I think it's a real service to the community to have these sessions. So thank you, and thank you for everyone who attended.
Well, thank you. All right. And with that, I think, do we have any other folks here announcements to make? Stand by for the the December topic, possibly Don Laird, Senator Laird. And in January, we have the new CAO, or CC, whatever it is, not an AO anymore, our county executive director.
Supervisor Circle, do you have any? Would you like to come?
Yeah, I didn't see you back there. Come on.
We can put you on the hot plate, but hot seat.
Oh, great.
That was a great presentation, Megan. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Some of you may know I also called for a Railbanking presentation at the RTC so people could understand really what it is, what it's not, what it affords, and we want to do it. So that should be coming, I think, in front of us in December. Okay, we have a new CEO, Nicole Coburn. She's great. We had 139 applicants, narrowed it down to about 5, and she made the top 2, and she's already in-house, and so she really understands the challenges of Santa Cruz County. I think Barry just said it. We only get 13.4 cents of every property tax dollar that's paid in. That's opposed to Santa Clara County at 55 cents. They get to keep 55 cents of every dollar. San Francisco gets to keep 65 cents. So that puts us like 5th from the bottom of all counties. Like we just don't have enough money here in our county. So that's one of my top priorities is economic development and vitality, trying to bring more retail businesses to that incorporated area. The other thing that everybody can always help with is to buy local, because anytime you buy from Amazon, the distribution center where it's delivered from gets to keep our sales tax. So we're actually minus about $6 million out of our general fund because people are buying things online. So as much as you can, shop local. If you need a new car, try to buy it locally. Stay. Let's see, we've opened a children's crisis center. It's not quite operational yet, but kids who are having mental health crisis are going to be able to stay for the first time in our own community. So that's a big deal. Wish Gigi was here. She would remind me all the other good things we're doing. You're remodeling your chambers. We're remodeling the chambers. Yeah. We have this little fund of money that can only be used for one thing, and that's for like communicating to the public. And so a little bit of everybody's property tax goes in there, and we can, or no, it's not property tax. It's actually like cable TV tax or something. But we can only use it for one thing, and so we're using it to remodel.
Is there going to be a 90,000 square foot ballroom?
Yeah, old. Yeah. And we kind of liked our boardroom before, it's really beautiful with all the oak and everything. And so it'll be new. But I'm working hard on behalf of District 2. I get probably about 50 to 100 email a day. A lot of people want to know about the roads. That's like the biggest complaint. Sometimes trash, sometimes other things. But if any of you have any issues that you'd like me to work on, feel free to go ahead and email me. I have 2 analysts, Maureen McCarty and Gigi Kelbert, both great. Maureen's on a little bit of a leave right now, but should be returning sometime December. So anyway, thanks everybody. Great to